All right, everybody, we are going into the next part of our Verse Beginners tutorial series. And in this one, we're going to cover UI. You can see at the top of the screen, we have blue and red. So we're going to keep track of a score or a set of events or whatever it is that you want to keep track of in your UI. In this case, we're going to shoot off some rockets and off they go. Each one goes up to the top and blows up. And if we hit these again, you can see the numbers continue to go up. And that is what we're going to do today. Before we get into this, I want to thank all of the early adopter patrons over on Patreon. You guys are locked in at $5 a month if you choose to stay. All new users will be coming in at $25 a month, and that gets you all the code to the tutorials and pre-releases. Thank you again to all of you early guys. You're the best. All right, let's get into this. On a quick note, look at these text effects. This is done with Adobe Firefly. This one right here is some dinosaurs. It looks so cool. I just had to put these in because they're neat. It looks 3D, but it's not. They're actually just 2D images, but it looks like it's 3D. It's pretty neat. All right, let's get into this. All right, we are inside of UEFN as usual. We're going to go over all the things that I use in this map. This is the same one as before, so I still got my old stuff in here. I'm just using different parts. We've got lots left to show all the other things to do with Verse, but we've got our two spawners over here. This is a model from Kitbash. I love Kitbash. This isn't sponsored. I just really like Kitbash. They have all really cool models. We've got two triggers in here, one each to put off a rocket. I've modified this model a little bit to open up the center because inside is a rocket. Let's take this guy out for a second and we'll take a look here at what's going on. So we've got our blue rocket and the other one has a red rocket. On the bottom of this rocket is a VFX device and an audio device. The VFX does my custom Niagara fire effect and the audio device does a rocket sound. So that's pretty cool. And the red one is exactly the same. And that is the whole scene setup. There's nothing exciting going on here, but we are going to keep track of how many times we shoot rockets off. So let's take a look at the Verse code to see how we do all of that. Okay, so we're inside of Verse now. We've got two files, same as before. We're just continuing on. We've got our game manager and our custom player. The majority of our changes are happening in the custom player because that's where you want to put your user interface stuff with Verse. So in the game manager, we just have a few additions. I'm not going to go over too much about how all the rockets work because it's not really very important. I want to talk about UI in this one. But we do have a few items here to note. So there's a blue and red trigger. These ones, when we shoot them, when they're damaged, they're going to trigger. And that trigger is going to make the rockets go off. We have our rockets here, rocket blue and rocket red. They are created props because they are blueprints. We have the rocket VFX blue and red because that's what's on the end of the rockets. And they have the custom Niagara effect. I'll show you that briefly in a sec. The rocket SFX blue and red because we need to make a sound for each one of them. And then there's an explosion at the very end, the two VFX spawners that I didn't show you, which live currently right here. And they have an explosion animation set for them. Okay, we also have a couple of constants. We've talked about constants in the last tutorial where we want to keep track of a thing and we want to apply a number to it. This makes it very easy to do some code where we want to be able to read what's going on, but we're not using a string to identify a thing. We're using just an int, a number. It's very useful. So we want to check if we can launch the blue rocket because we can only launch one at a time till they explode and go away, and then we can launch another. So keep track of those. And then we're going to keep track of a score here. So this is the important part for this tutorial and the UI stuff. We want to keep track of the score between the blue team and the red team in this case. You can have more scores, more stuff on the UI. Keeping track of them in here is pretty handy because you can use it to see if you've won or if something's going to happen, whatever. And then we're also going to keep track of the original position of the blue and red rocket. This is an easy way to put things back. We're going to cover Tycoon stuff in near future with all the Verse code that's involved with that. But this is kind of a beginning of that. So, all right, so let's take a look really quickly what's going on. We've got our trigger subscriptions happening here so that when we shoot them, they trigger and something's going to happen. And then we grab that transform I just talked about. So the transform is the position and rotation and scale too, for that matter, of a thing. So we're just going to store that. So we know that where to put back the blue rocket and the red rocket. So right now the blue rocket is out of its spot. So we can actually just select this and then put it back like that. And then that will be its spot that it'll go back to when it resets. Very handy, actually, this feature. The next thing that we need to do is set up when our triggers fire, what happens. And I've done a print because it's a very good idea for debugging. You're going to want to do this, a good practice. And then we're going to call one function launch rocket. Now you could put the launch rocket, because look at this is all my launch rocket code, all of this. Now you could put that inside of each one of these. But the point is that we want to centralize same style functionality. So both rockets are the same rockets. They both kind of got to go up and they both got to explode, and they both have an animation set to them with the animation controller, which we're not covering in this tutorial, but we will in the future. If you want to learn more about it, just check the docs. It's kind of involved, but the basics are you can do animation with code. It's neat. So we're going to call launch rocket, which calls a function. We're going to pass in, as we said, those constants, the blue rocket and the red rocket. Very handy. So we're going to check that when we get into here, because launch rocket might have, more stuff going on in it. It might have an initial sound, like a rocket is going to fire sound, 3, 2, 1 or something. And so you don't have to double that up here. So the doubling up does happen, though, in a way, because we are detecting whether or not it's a blue rocket or a red rocket. And also with that, we're checking to see if we can launch it, because if it's already launched, we have to wait. So we're going to check that logic right here. And we use the AND to do that inside of the if. So we're going to set the blue score up +1. And then we're going to tell everybody the score changed. So this is key to when we go to look at the custom player file. We're going to be calling a function called set team scores. And we're passing in the blue score and the red score because we're saving it in this class, the game manager class. And we're just going to run through the whole player's map, grabbing the custom player object that is in here. So this is just our loop. We've already covered this stuff, and we're going to call a function, blue score, red score. Then we're going to set the can launch blue rocket to false. We're going to enable the VFX that go off, and of course, then play the sound of the rocket firing. In fact, let's take a real quick look at the Niagara effect that I use. This is custom made. So this is a very basic 2-emitter Niagara effect. I encourage you, if you haven't already looked at the Niagara effects, to check them out. They're really neat. You can do all kinds of things with Niagara effects that are really fun. So there's 2 fountains, and so this is just the very basics. One's sort of a very orangey red glowy color, and the other one is more of a smoky color. You can see how these gray particles are coming off. This effect is very simple. I think anybody can make it. So if you want me to go over Niagara effects in future tutorials, let me know. But if not, I don't think it's worth covering because this is a verse tutorial. So then we have our movement keyframes that we're going to make for the rockets. So we have the first one that launches at 3,000 centimeters into the sky, and we have an ease out. So an ease out interpolation or animation means that it's going to start slow and go faster as the animation goes. And then our second keyframe that we put in here is to set it to go to 15,000 in a time frame of 5 seconds. The previous one is 1.5 seconds. I thought that just kind of worked well, and this one's linear. So as soon as it finishes this keyframe set, it goes to this keyframe, and that's done right in here. We will talk about all of this in a future tutorial, but for now, animation controllers are cool, easy enough to use, but can be very, very advanced. Very cool stuff. So we then do a spawning. So we're going to reset the rocket, and we're going to reset the blue rocket. Now the exact same code is running inside for the red one. So we go down to here, we can see it's the same thing, reset rocket, red rocket. This is what we want to pay attention to really quickly. So we're sleeping for 5 seconds because that's how long it takes the rocket to get up there. And then we're going to check if it's the blue rocket or the red rocket. In such a case, explode the explosion VFX after moving it to the rocket's location. And then teleport the rocket back to its original position. So that's just to give you guys of the round trip that I'm doing simply for the visuals of this tutorial, which aren't really that important because you're probably never going to really use this kind of thing. But this type of logic is important to consider. And then we reset the rocket that it can go again. So I think this is useful, so I covered it a little bit, but that's about all. The rest is just left over from the other tutorials. Okay, so let's take a look at the custom player file so we can understand the UI element. This is what this is really about. So UI is really cool. We can do UI in 2 ways. We can do it with verse or we can do it with HUD devices. The HUD devices will take a UI blueprint that you can make, but we're going to do everything in verse this time. I think one of the main problems that people have with doing things in verse is you can't visually check it out right away. It's kind of hard to figure out. but that's okay. We're going to sort that out here. So we have our custom player class. We have our old stuff that's all in here. Nothing special going on here. You should understand this by now. And we're going to create 2 text blocks. Those text blocks are the ones that live up at the top of the screen that show the score or the count or the team number or whatever it is. This is going to be an element on the screen that we can change the value of. So that's going to go from 0 up to whatever number. Text blocks are really good for that. In fact, it's what they're primarily for. And then we have texture blocks. So a texture block is an image. We can put an image on the screen. So I've got 2 of these, blue team texture and red team texture, and I'm setting the default value right here. And you can see we've got the default image of blue team UI and default image of red team UI. These live in a folder in the content browser, and we have to make sure we put in that folder name with a using with the curly brackets and then UI. So if we take a look inside of my content browser here and go into UI, we can see there are some images in here. Now the ones that I'm using for the UI are just textures. You don't have to make a material for that. So the red team UI and blue team UI, which is here. So that's what this one is. This is the blue one and the other one. And this is the red one. So those are the ones that are going to show up on the screen for the user. So that's how we set those here. If this turns out, if this is, say for example, we delete this, these will have a little red squiggly underneath them saying, I can't find them. I don't know where this thing is. Do you mean UI.blueteamUI? And if we put in UI.blueteamUI, that will work as well. But personally, I like to put in the using UI there. And then we can leave this, but I'm going to get rid of it so that it isn't confusing. So that we know we're going to be using files that are in this folder for here, but you can do it the other way too. So the default desired size is a vector 2. So it's a width and height. So that's what a vector 2 is, no depth. And it is going to be 100 by 100. Now your images could be different size or different proportions. Mine are square, so 100 by 100. So we'll set the default here, and that concludes how to set up a texture block for the basics of the UI. We also need a string to message function here, and what this does is it takes a string and converts it to a message object, because that's what's going to go inside of the text block. Kind of weird, but you just need this, just remember it. So we're going to pass in a value, and that is a string. We're going to pass in the number. So then inside of here as well, we're going to keep track of the blue team score and the red team score. We're not actually keeping track of them, we're getting them set from the game manager, but we keep track of them locally here in this class. All right, so let's get on to the meat and potatoes of this, where we initialize our player when they spawn in. We've already covered all that in past tutorials, so I'm not going to cover that this time. But this gets called when a player spawns in. So we're going to set the text block to something now. So we've defined it up here. This is the definition. This is the thing that we're going to use in this class. But we want to properly set it up here. So we're going to initialize it fully with what's going to be in here. So we set it because it's a variable, so we can change it compared to something being a constant that you can't change. And we're going to set that to be a text block with a default text of string to message, because we have to convert to a message object, the blue team score, which happens to be 0. And then we want to set the color. So the default text color will be blue, and this is a named color, so you have to use a library for that, which is just up at the top here, verse.org colors. Don't forget to put in spatial math and UI for the additional libraries that we need to run this. Okay, and then the final default items we put in is the default shadow color of black and the default shadow offset of 2 pixels. I don't know if it's pixels or centimeters or what this is, but 2 is a good amount of shadow to put on some text. And we've done the same thing for the red, except the text here is red. So very simple. You can also use hex. It's not going to be a named color, but you can put in hex values in here or convert to hex. I can't remember exactly. I always use named colors because it's very simple and there's a lot of them. So there's no shortage of those. In fact, if you want to know how many there are, just control left click on named colors here, and this will take you to this massive list of colors that they've already put in, set up already. I mean, look at how many colors there are. How can you go wrong with this? There's tons of them. Anyhow, All right, moving on. Okay, so moving on, we want to create a canvas. A canvas is a way to put things onto the screen. So we're going to create a canvas object, call it score widget, and we're going to do that by calling this function create user UI. This is going to create the canvas, all the things that go on it. And then we're going to see if we can get that player object from the agent object that is set for this player. And we add a widget, which is the score widget, which is what lives at the top of the screen. So let's take a look at what that looks like. We have a function called create user UI. It is private, so it can't be called from outside of this class. That's an important thing to think about. It's going to return canvas, a canvas object. So this is what is called here. We get back the score widget. We then add this widget to the player, score widget like this. So this is the very basics of creating UI with Verse, very powerful. So at the very beginning of this, we're going to create a canvas object and call it UI canvas. And inside of the canvas object, we have slots, which is an array. So a slot is just a thing that kind of goes in there, and we're going to set up an array of those. And inside of here, we have a canvas slot, 1 and 2 here, essentially, and those hold. This one holds this particular widget, the blue team texture. That's the widget for it. And we then set up its placement. So we want to use the anchors, and that is an object as well. It's for anchors. These anchors set up the minimum and maximum, essentially the placement of the object on the screen. I've set the placement of this texture, the blue team texture, just like the red team texture. They both have their own placements. This one's set to 0.6 and 0, 0.6 and 0 for minimum and maximum, to put them in a spot specifics. This one's 0.4 and 0.4, and the Y is 0.0. So the X is the left to right, and the Y is up and down. Now you can really just consider these to be percentages. So 0.4 is 40%, 0.4, 0%, and then down here is 0.6, 60%. The left side is 0%, the right side is 100%. So 40% across the screen, or 0.4, is going to be just slightly left of center. And then the 0.6 is slightly right of center. Hopefully that makes sense. So these are just simply values between 0 and 1 so that you can sort out where it's going to be no matter the position of, no matter the size of the screen and no matter the scaling of the screen. And then 0 just means that I'm pinning it to the very tippy top of the screen, because my images come in at, I think I've made them 512 by 512. There's a bunch of empty space at the top of them. So these are going to change based on your image. This works really well for me. And then I line up the text to be really close to that as well, but it's going to be sitting 10% down from the top. So 0.1, Y is set to 0.1, and it's same for the red text, set to 0.1 here. That means that it's going to sit 10% below the top of the screen. And that's how you place an object. Now, again, it's really going to depend on the size of your texture. If you have a big texture, a small texture, or whatever, or if you want to place it to the left or the right or something like that, these numbers will change. You have to sort that out based on what you see when you code it and then view it. That's the only thing about this. You do this and then you have to test and see where it shows up. But as you get better at it, it requires less thinking, trust me. We then have offsets. I almost always set these to 0. I don't usually have a lot of usage for offsets, so I just set them to 0. And then there's alignment for the text. Now the alignment for the text is kind of important because it figures out where it's going to sit within the space that you have offered and when it resizes itself by changing the amount. So I put the X at 0.5, which means it's going to center itself. And the Y I put to 1, which means it's going to sit at the bottom of the box that it's being allowed to sit in. You can set the Y to 0 and it'll sit at the top of that box, or 0.5 in the middle. Same with the X. But the Y generally doesn't change. I just sort of floor. I put it down to the bottom of its available location. And then we put size to content to true. I've never had a case where I want to put this to false. So I just put it to true. The Z order, if you have elements on your screen that sit on top of each other, you're going to want to change the Z order to represent that. The higher the number, the more it's going to sit on top. And then the widget, overlay slots array, overlay slot widget, that goes inside of here. It's kind of weird, but there's a widget that we're going to use. It's called overlay. And then inside of there, it requires an array of overlay slots. And the widget that we're putting in this overlay slot is blue team score text. Something you could memorize, think about, but as you get more into UI, you'll understand it more. We need to cover the basics of this one. So this is how we would set up a text object on the screen for the UI with verse. Now the red is exactly the same, just slightly different positioning. Nothing very interesting going on there. Okay, and then finally, the real meat of this is where we set the score. Now the cool thing about doing this with verse is that we can set the score simply by changing the text inside a blue team scored text. It will set off a series of events inside of the UI that says, okay, let's change that on the screen. And so all we have to do is just put blue team scored text, which is our text block. We call set text because that's what's going to change the text in there. And then we just use the string to message and put in what this is, blue team and red team. But this is a bit of a shortcut because we also, if we wanted to use these blue team, red team scores later, we then would put in set blue team score here equals blue team. And then we would do the same for the red as well. And then we would take these and put these into here. This would be a better practice to do. We didn't have to do it, but here are both ways on how to do this. So that way we would always have this in here, this blue team score updated inside of the custom player class. So if we set the team scores and then did this and we said, okay, see if there is a winner, and that's just a function like that. And then we'd make a function here, see if winner. And we would then go if blue team score is greater than red team score, then do something here, print blue team. I've missed something, hang on. Probably driving a couple of you crazy. Blue team wins, sort of idea. Get rid of that capital H there. Okay, and then we'd see the blue team wins, and then if not, then else if, or we just put else actually, and then just go print red team wins. Now this doesn't account for if they're equals, so we could do that as well. If blue team score equals red team score, actually if it doesn't equal red team score, then do the comparison like that. So if they're not equal, do a comparison and see which one wins. So you could do something like this, or you can put something else on the screen, something like that. You could put an icon on the screen that says you guys are in the lead or something like that. So this is very useful to be able to have these values available inside of here if we wanted to change it. But also it would be a very good idea to do it inside of the game manager so that you could probably run more things, but you can also do it inside the custom player. There are so many options. It really is dependent on the game that you are making. Anyway, so that's it for this one. If you have any questions, let me know anytime. Hopefully that's covered UI at the very basics that you can understand how to put an image and changeable text onto the screen. A lot of fun stuff. So that's it for this one. I will see you guys in the next one.